Welcome to the Medical Maze, Decoding Misunderstood Diseases. I'm your host, Donnellen Ray. And before we go any further, let me introduce my co-host, Phil Bird.
Hi, Donnellen. How are you? I'm so excited to do this podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, and thank you for joining me.
So this podcast is something that it's going to be big. Honestly, it really is, because there are so many misunderstood, misdiagnosed diseases out there, and people need a resource. People need some comfort. What are we doing with this podcast, first of all, and what do you think people are going to get out of it?
Well, from my own experience with a misunderstood disease and actually misdiagnosed disease, it kind of prompted this podcast and this idea of there's got to be other folks out there who have different conditions and different diseases that we want to go and maybe just don't have a resource or, as you said, or the education or the information in order to go and pursue the right path for treatment, for diagnosis, for treatment. What do I do here? And I just think that there are, as you said, there are many, many out there that I think we can go and maybe put into an episode or a bite-sized chunk for people to go and set them on their path forward.
Now, you said earlier, if you guys haven't watched or listened to the previous episode or the promo, you've dealt with your own misdiagnosed or mistreated disease, and you had to go through a whole entire process. You want to get everybody up to speed if they haven't had a chance to view or listen to those episodes?
Certainly. I was diagnosed after many years of being treated for something else, but with lipedema. It is an adipose tissue disease, a fat tissue disease, but I was misdiagnosed or just not diagnosed for the longest time. And I know that was very frustrating for me because I knew that there was something else going on, and it wasn't what I was being told, because I was doing all the things that should have helped, correct that or at least treat it. And I wasn't getting better. And I know that I'm not the only one out there. And so there are also, I know other women in my position, other diseases out there for other people, men, women, who really just need to go and have some sort of place to go, a resource, information to go and try to get their own diagnosis and treatment.
Yeah, so I got some stats here for you. This may shock you, so it may not shock you, honestly. Did you know that in the United States, 12 million people are affected by a medical diagnosis error? So that means they're
Wow.
either misdiagnosed or mistreated, and an estimated 40,000 to 80,000 people die based off of that misdiagnosis or mistreatment. And here's another stat that you probably didn't know. Women and minorities are 20 to 30% higher to be affected by that.
Oh, that's tragic. That's just tragic. And no, I didn't know those. And when you wrap your mind around that, that's just, number one, it's just, appalling and frustrating. And, you want to believe that we are tops in our technology and our medical, information and our education, and we have the best health care, or at least we're at the top in our health care. And when you hear stats like that, it makes my heart hurt, quite honestly.
Yeah, and I don't know if you knew this either, because I'm going down the misdiagnosed disease rabbit hole right now. And so cancer is the most misdiagnosed disease. Did you know that?
No, and I wow, it's something that seems to be so prevalent that I'm sure all of us can name, members of our family or friends that have been affected by it, and to think that is so misdiagnosed.
Yeah, so cervical cancer, prostate cancer, and colon cancer are the top 3 most misdiagnosed diseases.
Oh my.
Which is insane, because those three cancers, I'm just going off of anecdotal evidence here. Don't quote me on it, but I've lost someone with all 3 of those. You know what I mean? I've lost an individual person with those 3 diseases because maybe they were misdiagnosed to begin with. But this podcast isn't really about the ones that are very, very common. There's a lot of diseases that are rare, that you may not even
Absolutely.
heard about, that we want to shed a light on, or we want to spotlight. And we're not doing this show because we are experts. I'm not a doctor. Don Ellen's not a doctor
Absolutely not.
either, but we want to use this platform to be able to spotlight individuals who may be experiencing a misdiagnosed disease or something that's being mistreated. And maybe we can use this whole community of the podcast world to have a solution, or to find a solution for those people, because podcasts, we are a family here, and I think that any type of help for anybody could help. So if you have a misdiagnosed disease, or if you're even thinking about you may have something misdiagnosed, this podcast is for you. And also just education, because I'll let Don Ellen explain some of this, but we plan on having some people in the field, medical professionals and so forth. So you want to go ahead and explain who we plan on having, not on the patient side, but just from the medical point of view.
Well, there are some, as you were saying, our family members and friends that have been misdiagnosed, or even we have, or some not common diseases as well, some uncommon ones. I have a family member who, for instance, who has Turner syndrome, and it wasn't one that when I had heard that I knew much about. And not only just her story, but maybe her doctor. How did he become aware of it? What is his training in that? How do you go about getting diagnosed for this? And it's just something, in Turner's, for those that aren't familiar, it is a chromosomal defect on the X chromosome in females. It's either partially developed or absent. And so it's kind of like, okay, so how did that happen, and what was the symptoms? So and how do you go about getting diagnosis? What's the treatment? So if we can go and talk to experts in that, or maybe therapists, or anyone else who may be in that medical community who can treat that disease, those, we would love to hear from them. We would love to be able to share that information, and and provide that resource to people who just need to have some sort of understanding, or it's impacted them, or their child, or their parent, or their family member, or whoever it is that has come into their lives, that they just need to have some information on.
Exactly. And I'll explain a little bit about some of my situations. We can delve into this even deeper. There are millions of kids and adults that are diagnosed with autism, right? Mm-hmm. That's not a rare disease. 1 in 88 children are diagnosed with autism, which is a staggering number. Mm-hmm. But the reason why I want to bring this situation up in the podcast is because my son, who has autism, he has very low functioning autism. And what that is he's nonverbal. He doesn't speak. He's very violent. And I feel that the neurodivergent community, they just kind of spotlight the happy side of the autism spectrum. And they don't really spotlight or talk about that side. And, there's, right. It's a very scary situation sometimes. And definitely, I feel like education will help a lot of people, because just the story on how my son got help is, honestly, it's tragic. If I told you, Don Ellen, it's very tragic. And, not everything that is going to be on this podcast is going to have a happy ending. Honestly,
sure.
We got to be real with that. The trials and tribulations that me and my wife had to go through, yeah. I'll even admit, some of them downright illegal.
Oh, gosh.
Had to do.
And parents, when it comes to your children, that's what a helpless feeling. What a helpless feeling that is, when you're trying to do everything you go to every place that you can think of to get help, to get information, and it's just not there, or it's not complete, or it's not thorough. And where do you turn to? Where do you turn to?
Exactly. And it's scary, but that is going to be, it'll probably be an emotional episode, because I normally get emotional whenever I do talk about my son. It's sometimes happy tears, but autism is not a rare disease or a misdiagnosed disease, but there are portions of that aren't spotlighted. And I think that this would be a perfect part to talk about on the show. I have a friend Their child has a disease called Angelman syndrome, and we won't tell you about it, what it is. You can go and look that up. But we would
Mm-hmm.
like to have them on the show. That's a very, very rare disease and often misdiagnosed disease. But let me ask you a question, Don Ellen. When based off your own experience, right? You were misdiagnosed at first. How hard was it to actually get diagnosed correctly? Like, how long was that process?
It was very, very long. And actually, I kind of stumbled into it because I was going to see a, a doctor about something else. And I happened to ask them about this symptom, because for me, my condition was painful and it was unusually so. And I'd asked, about that, and he happened to be aware. But it was years that it took before I got there. And I quite honestly stumbled on it. And how sad is that, honestly? That had that not happened and I not kind of stumbled on it. But it was, I would say, I got an official diagnosis like 4 years ago, and I was being treated for other things before then for like 15 years. So it's tragic that instead of just knowing, having a resource to go to and knowing that I could get some help and find some information, it I stumbled on it.
Yeah. So I hope this podcast does reach the people who it needs to. But if you are viewing this and you have a family member or you are experiencing a rare or misdiagnosed disease, we're going to put the link actually right here. It's medicalmaidspodcast.com. Everything is listed on the website. You can download the podcast episodes. You can subscribe to the newsletter, which will be sent out. You'll get notified whenever a new podcast is released or a new blog is updated. You can register as a guest. That's how we're going to be able to put you on the show, so you can be able to tell your story. You can register as a guest, and also you can go ahead and subscribe on Apple and Spotify and all those other podcast platforms, because the podcast is available on all those platforms. And I think this will be a very informative, awakening podcast for people, because there are diseases that people don't know about. And I'm sure there are some people out there that feel like they may be alone.
Mm-hmm.
And I hope this podcast gives them some insight, and hopefully they don't feel that they're alone. So, Don Ellen, do you have any final words before we get out of here today?
No, other than thank you. Thank you all for listening. And we look forward to hearing from you. We want your comments. We want to all be in this educational community together.
All right. Well, we will catch you later. See ya.
Thank you.